The fire crackles softly as the night settles in. Imagine the gentle glow of candlelight in the halls of Hogwarts, the quiet rustle of ancient pages, and the comforting hum of distant magic. Tonight, we'll take a journey through the entire story of Hazel Ashwood, unfolding slowly and calmly, guiding you into peaceful sleep. Let the magic of the wizarding world wrap around you. Hazel Ashwood stood on platform 9 3/4, her heart fluttering with quiet excitement. Around her the air shimmered with late summer morning light and the gentle hiss of steam from the scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express. Witches and wizards bustled about the platform, but their movements, though hurried, felt warm and reassuring. Parents gave last tight hugs and tender words to their children. Owls hooted softly from their cages, and cats curled sleepily atop trunks. Amid this delightful chaos, Hazel felt the warmth of her mother's arms as they embraced one last time. "We're so proud of you," her mother whispered into her hair, voice both thrilled and a little tearful. Hazel squeezed her back, inhaling the familiar comfort of home one more time. Her father stood by with a proud smile, his hand resting gently on Hazel's new luggage trolley that carried a large trunk and a wicker basket. Inside the basket, Hazel's kitten, Misty, mewed quietly, as if sensing the moment. Hazel pulled away and gave her parents a bright smile. "I'll write soon," she promised softly. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach, but also a deep sense of wonder. She was really here, about to go to Hogwarts, the magical school she had only read about in stories until a few months ago. Her father helped lift Hazel's heavy trunk onto the train. The polished red locomotive gleamed, and a soft puff of steam enveloped them as a conductor called kindly, "All aboard now. The train leaves at 11 sharp." The sound of it was cheerful, not alarming, and Hazel found comfort in the routine bustle. With a final wave to her parents, who waved back enthusiastically, Hazel stepped up into the carriage. Inside the Hogwarts Express, a warm glow lit the narrow corridor. The floor gently vibrated under Hazel's feet as students hurried past in both directions, searching for seats. Hazel held Misty's basket carefully in one hand and gripped her wand case, a brand new Hollywood wand that still felt strange and wonderful to her, in her coat pocket with the other. Just for reassurance, she peeked into a couple of compartments. Most were already filled with chattering groups of students. At last, near the middle of the train, she found a compartment that was nearly empty. Only one other student sat by the window. Hazel slid the door open quietly and offered a tentative smile. "Hi, do you mind if I sit here?" she asked, in a polite, hushed tone. The girl by the window turned, and Hazel saw she had kind brown eyes and a warm smile. "Not at all. Please do," the girl said brightly, gesturing to the cushioned seat across from her. Hazel noticed the girl had a book open on her lap, and a small cage with a brown owl perched calmly inside, eyes closed as if dozing. Relieved, Hazel lifted her trunk into the overhead rack with a bit of effort. The other girl quickly stood to help, steadying one end of the trunk until it was safely stowed. "Thank you," Hazel murmured. She carefully placed Misty's basket on the seat beside her and sat down, smoothing her skirt and new black robe. "I'm Olivia, by the way, Olivia Green," the girl introduced herself, extending a hand once they were settled. "Hazel Ashwood," Hazel replied softly, shaking Olivia's hand. Olivia's handshake was gentle but confident, and Hazel felt some of her nervousness melt away. Olivia nodded toward the basket. "What's your friend's name?" Hazel brightened at the chance to talk about her pet. "This is Misty," she said, lifting the lid slightly. A round gray kitten's face peeked out, whiskers twitching as she sniffed the new air. "She's a bit shy," Hazel added in a fond whisper. Misty gave a tiny, inquisitive mew, then decided it was safe enough and hopped out onto Hazel's lap. kneading softly at her robes before curling up contentedly. Olivia let out a soft coo. "Oh, she's adorable, Hi, Misty," she said quietly, leaning forward to let the kitten sniff her hand. Misty accepted Olivia's gentle petting with a small paw. "I have an owl," Olivia continued, nodding to the dozing bird in the cage by her feet. "His name is Orion. He's not as cuddly as a cat, but he's very clever." Hazel found herself smiling. The atmosphere in the compartment was calm and comforting. Through the window, she could see silhouettes of parents on the platform waving and calling farewells. The distant chatter and laughter of students in the corridor mingled with the low rumble of the train preparing to depart. Hazel realized her earlier jitters had settled into a warm excitement. With a sudden lurch and a cheerful whistle, the Hogwarts Express began to move. Hazel and Olivia both turned to look out the window as the train slowly pulled away from the platform. Hazel spotted her parents one last time, her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, her father raising his arm in a big wave. Hazel pressed her palm to the cool glass in goodbye. They receded into the distance, the platform giving way to the brick walls of the station, and soon the train emerged into the open countryside. "We're really off," Olivia said, her voice hushed but brimming with happiness. She tucked her book away, clearly too excited now to read. Hazel nodded, feeling a delighted warmth blooming in her chest. As the train picked up speed, London's urban scenery melted into the rolling green of the English countryside. Tall buildings gave way to meadows dotted with wildflowers and grazing cows, and soon they were passing woodlands that blurred into a tapestry of green and gold under the late summer sun. Hazel cracked open the compartment window just an inch. A rush of mild air fluttered in, carrying the scent of grass and a hint of distant rain. The sound of the wheels on the track became a rhythmic, soothing clickety-clack that seemed to match Hazel's heartbeat, gradually easing. Olivia and Hazel chatted quietly as the hours passed. They spoke of their excitement for Hogwarts. Olivia, who came from a wizarding family, shared how her older brother had told her about the moving staircases and the enchanted ceiling in the great hall that looked like the sky. Hazel, who was Muggle-born, listened in wonder as Olivia described these things, thrilled to have a friend who didn't mind explaining. In turn, Hazel described how astonishing Diagon Alley had been when she visited to buy her school things. Her eyes lit up as she recalled the shelves of spellbooks, the rows of cauldrons, and the first time she held her wand at Ollivander. Olivia listened with as much excitement as if she hadn't grown up hearing of these wonders. Time seemed to slow to a comfortable, lazy pace. Occasionally, other students would pass by their compartment door, and a few poked their heads in, some looking for lost pets or checking in with friends. At one point, a round-faced boy came by asking if they had seen a toad. Hazel sympathetically shook her head, and Olivia offered to help look later if needed. The boy thanked them and hurried on. Hazel made a mental note of his Hufflepuff tie from the list of school uniform accessories, though none of them had been sorted yet. He was already proudly wearing one, perhaps a hand-me-down from a sibling. The thought of the sorting made Hazel's stomach flutter again, but Olivia gave her an encouraging grin. "Don't worry, my brother says the sorting hat doesn't hurt or anything. It's quick and you'll join whichever house suits you best." Hazel smiled back gratefully. "I just hope I'll fit in," she admitted softly. "You will," Olivia assured her. "Whichever house you're in, we can still be friends. And everyone at Hogwarts is friendly, really." Hazel stroked Misty's soft fur as the kitten napped in her lap, and gazed out at the countryside again. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower, casting long shadows of trees across fields. They must have been traveling for a few hours now. As if on cue, her stomach gave a small rumble. Apparently Olivia heard it, because she gave a light laugh.
"I was just thinking about food too," Olivia said. "They usually have a witch with a trolley come by with sweets and sandwiches."
Right on schedule, as if summoned by their thoughts. There was a gentle knock, and the compartment doors slid open. A kindly, older witch in neat robes smiled at them from the doorway, pushing a trolley loaded with all sorts of magical snacks. Anything from the trolley, dears? She asked in a motherly voice. Hazel's eyes widened at the sight. There were chocolate frogs in their illustrated boxes, pumpkin pasties steaming gently in warm wrappers, packs of birdie bots, every flavor beans, cauldron cakes, dusted with sugar, and more. She fumbled in her pocket for the handful of coins her parents had given her for the trip. Olivia stood and examined the trolley's wares cheerfully. We'll take a pumpkin pasty, please, and maybe some chocolate frogs, Olivia said, pulling out a few silver sickles. Hazel managed to pay for a cauldron cake and a small box of every flavor beans, curious to try them. The trolley witch passed them their treats wrapped in napkins and foil. Hazel thanked her politely, and the witch winked kindly at both girls. Enjoy, dearies, and best of luck at Hogwarts, she said before trundling on to the next compartment. With the compartment door shut again, Hazel felt cozy and content. The two girls unwrapped their treats. The pumpkin pasty was warm in Hazel's hands, and when she bit in, the flaky crust gave way to sweet and spiced pumpkin filling that tasted like autumn comfort. She sighed happily. Olivia giggled at her expression. Good, isn't it? Delicious, Hazel agreed, the pastry crust melting in her mouth. They swapped a bit of their snacks, Olivia offering a bite of her pumpkin pasty, savory with hints of pepper and thyme, while Hazel shared a piece of her cauldron cake, rich with chocolate and a hint of treacle. Hazel tried in every flavor bean that, thankfully, turned out to taste of strawberry jam. One chocolate frog did attempt to hop out of Olivia's hand, but Hazel gently caught it before it could leap off the seat, both girls laughing softly as Hazel placed it back in Olivia's palm. The little frog made of chocolate settled as if resigned to its fate, and Olivia took a bite. They always try to get away, she joked quietly. As evening approached, the sky outside began to glow with the golden pink of sunset. The clouds were painted in soft hues, and the light in the compartment turned honey-colored and drowsy. Misty woke and stretched, then hopped up onto the window ledge to peer outside, tail swishing lazily. Hazel stroked her, watching as the scenery changed once more. They were getting closer now. She could feel it. The landscape had become wilder. Hills rose higher, and the train occasionally curved around a bend, giving a view of a distant river glittering in the fading light. Olivia changed into her school robes, and Hazel did the same, both girls helping each other with the awkward fastenings of their new black robes. The fabric felt strange but exciting against Hazel's skin, another reminder that this was all real. Their conversation had slowed comfortably, as both grew a little quiet, gazing out in anticipation. A gentle hush fell between them, not out of awkwardness, but a shared feeling of awe for what awaited at journey's end. As twilight settled, small lamps in the compartment flickered on, casting a warm glow over the red velvet seats, and the two girls now snug in their robes. Hazel found herself fighting a slight yawn. The rhythmic motion of the train and the quiet companionship made her eyelids heavy. Olivia noticed and gave a knowing smile. It has been a long day, she said softly. Maybe just rest for a bit. I'll wake you when we get close. Hazel nodded, suddenly realizing how nice a short nap might feel. Thank you, she murmured. She curled up a little in her corner of the seat, Misty hopping back down from the window to nestle against her. The kitten was purring steadily, a gentle vibration against Hazel's side. Olivia returned to her own seat by the window, humming quietly to herself as she watched the darkening scenery. Hazel closed her eyes. The sounds of the train, the steady chug of the engine far ahead, the soft whoosh of passing air, the clack of wheels on rails, blended into a lullaby of sorts. In her drowsy state, Hazel imagined the excitement to come, the castle, the feast, the new home she would find at Hogwarts. But those thoughts drifted like soft clouds, not stirring her up, just filling her with contentment. She breathed in deeply, smelling faint traces of pumpkin spice and chocolate still lingering in the air, and breathed out all her remaining worries. Safe and comfortable on the journey, Hazel Ashwood let herself drift into a light, dreamlike sleep, cradled by the gentle motion of the Hogwarts Express carrying her northward to the start of a magical new chapter. Hazel woke to a gentle nudge on her shoulder. She blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented, until she remembered she was on the Hogwarts Express. Olivia was leaning over from the opposite seat, her face lit softly by the amber glow of the compartment's lamp. Outside the window it was fully dark, but Hazel could see the faint glow of station lights in the distance. The train was slowing down with a gradual screech of brakes.
"We're nearly there," Olivia said in a hushed, excited tone. Misty lifted her head from Hazel's lap, ears pricked at the new sounds of students moving about in the corridor. Hazel sat up, smoothing her hair and gently placing Misty back into her basket for safety. Her heart fluttered. This was it. They had arrived at Hogsmeade Station, the stop for Hogwarts.
Through the window, Hazel caught sight of a tiny platform illuminated by old-fashioned lanterns. Beyond it, the shapes of pine trees and a vast, dark expanse of what must be the Black Lake stretched under the starry sky. The cool glass fogged slightly as she exhaled. Students began filling the corridor, retrieving luggage and caged pets. Hazel carefully took her trunk down, with Olivia's help, and made sure Misty's basket was secure in her arms. "Are you ready?" Olivia asked, with a bright grin. Hazel nodded, smiling back. Despite the nervous excitement buzzing in her chest, she felt surprisingly calm now. Perhaps it was the nap, or simply the sense that she was no longer alone in this adventure. They joined the line of chattering first years shuffling out of the compartment and down the train's narrow aisle. Stepping off the train, Hazel felt a cool breeze immediately caress her face. The night air smelled of pine trees and lake water, refreshing after the long ride. All around, the first-year students clustered together on the small Hogsmeade Station platform. It was quieter than King's Cross had been, aside from the hissing of the train engine and the murmurs of students. The night was still and expectant. Fur's ears over here," a friendly booming voice called. Hazel turned toward it and saw the largest man she had ever encountered, waving a lantern high above his head. He was a giant of a man, with a wild mane of curly hair and a beard that looked soft and tangled. Despite his imposing size, he had a broad, warm smile. Hazel recognized him from Olivia's descriptions on the train. This must be Hagrid, the keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Gathering her courage, Hazel followed Olivia and the other new students. As they trotted over to Hagrid, he greeted them with twinkling eyes. "All right there. Welcome to Hogwarts," he said kindly. The yellow light from his lantern danced across the eager faces of the first years. Hazel clutched Misty's basket a little closer, and Misty peered out curiously but didn't make a sound.
"No more'n 4 to a boat," Hagrid instructed, pointing a large hand toward the lake's shore just beyond the station. There, bobbing gently in the water, were a fleet of small boats, each with a little lamp hanging at its prow. They looked like fairy tale vessels, ready to carry them into the night.
Hazel and Olivia made their way to an empty boat nearby. The wooden boat rocked ever so slightly as they stepped in. Hazel sat down carefully on the bench, placing Misty's basket between her feet and resting her trunk at the back of the boat. 2 other first-year girls climbed in with them. One was the same round-faced girl who had peeked into their compartment earlier, looking for her toad. She introduced herself shyly as Clara. Another student, a boy with dark hair and bright, curious eyes, joined at the last moment, giving a little grin to everyone but seeming too excited for formal introductions just yet. Hagrid checked that everyone was safely aboard. Then he took a boat for himself, which dipped notably under his weight, though he seemed used to it. Holding his lantern up high, he called out, "Forward!" With that, the flotilla of little boats set off across the Black Lake. Hazel's breath caught in her throat as their boat glided smoothly over the mirror-like water. The surface of the lake was so still that it reflected the night sky above perfectly. It was as though they were drifting through a sea of stars. The only sounds were the soft paddling of invisible oars and the gentle lapping of water against the wooden hull. It was a short journey, but every moment felt magical. A cool night breeze ruffled Hazel's robes and tickled the curls of hair at her neck. Olivia pointed ahead, practically bouncing on the bench. Look, we're about to see it, she whispered. Hazel turned, following Olivia's gaze. The boats rounded a bend where the dense trees opened up, and suddenly the silhouette of Hogwarts Castle rose into view across the lake. Hazel's eyes widened in pure wonder. The castle was aglow with lights in its many windows, golden against the deep blue backdrop of the night. Turrets and towers reached towards the sky, and the whole vast castle was reflected in the water below, shimmering gently with the boat's ripple. Gasps of awe could be heard among the first years. Hazel felt a lump in her throat. It was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. The castle looked ancient and welcoming all at once, as if it had been standing there for centuries just waiting for them to arrive. She exchanged a glance with Olivia, who had tears of joy in her eyes. Hazel realized she probably did too. She quickly wiped at her face with her sleeve, smiling broadly. As the boats carried them closer to the cliff on which Hogwarts stood, Hazel noticed some movement in the water out of the corner of her eye, a gentle ripple that seemed to follow alongside their boat for a moment. She leaned slightly over the edge, and for a heartbeat thought she saw a large pale shape under the water, maybe an arm-sized tentacle. It vanished, almost as soon as it appeared. Hazel remembered Olivia's mention of the giant squid that lived in the lake, a creature students said was friendly and often curious about first years on their boats. The thought made her grin. Perhaps the squid had come to greet them tonight. The journey across the lake ended as the boats drifted into a kind of underground harbor at the base of the castle, where a set of stone steps led up from the water to dry ground. The boats bumped gently, one by one, against a mossy wooden dock. Hazel could see the glow of torches along the cavernous boathouse walls. Everyone off now. Mind your step, Hagrid called. Hazel carefully stood, making sure to grab Misty's basket and her trunk handle. The boy in their boat jumped out first, then politely offered a hand to help Hazel and the other girls out onto the dock. Hazel thanked him softly. Her legs felt a little wobbly after the boat ride, but it was a pleasant kind of unsteadiness, like after a fun swing ride. They gathered on the rocky ground as Hagrid counted heads. Misty let out a tiny mew from her basket, and Hazel whispered reassurance to her. The air here was cooler and smelled of damp stone and lake water. Above them, the castle loomed high. Hazel could make out an ivy-covered cliffside, and far up, a path leading into the castle proper. "This way, first years," came a crisp voice from up the stone steps. Holding a lit wand was a tall witch in emerald green robes and a pointed hat, her posture perfectly straight. Hazel recognized Professor McGonagall from pictures she had seen in Hogwarts, a history, and from Olivia's descriptions. Even in the flickering torchlight, McGonagall's expression was not unkind, just formal and a touch stern, like someone determined to maintain order on this special night. Her eyes surveyed the cluster of first years as if assessing a new flock of chicks. Hagrid gave the group an encouraging nod and smile. "Yeah, all right. From here, Professor?" he asked. "Yes, thank you, Hagrid. I'll take them on," McGonagall replied, her tone brisk, but gentler than her appearance might suggest. Hagrid waved to the first years, his lantern light bobbing as he headed back to ferry some older students or tend to the boats. The first years followed Professor McGonagall up the narrow stone staircase, carved into the rock. Hazel felt her heart thumping again with anticipation, but Olivia, just ahead of her, glanced back and gave her a reassuring grin. The stairs emerged into a flagstone path, and then into the vast entrance courtyard of the castle. Shadows of tall archways and statues danced on the ground in the torchlight. Hazel marveled at the huge wooden doors that stood at the end of the courtyard, the entrance to Hogwarts itself. McGonagall led them through those doors, and Hazel had her first step inside Hogwarts Castle. The entrance hall beyond took her breath away. It was enormous, with a ceiling so high she had to tilt her head all the way back to see it. The space was illuminated by flaming torches and brackets, and the stone walls were adorned with colorful banners representing the four houses: scarlet for Gryffindor, blue for Ravenclaw, green for Slytherin, and yellow for Hufflepuff. The banner with the badger caught Hazel's eye and gave her a little spark of curiosity. Would that perhaps be her house? She quickly reminded herself not to speculate too much. Soon the Sorting Hat would decide. They came to a halt in this grand hall. The muffled sound of many voices talking and dishes clinking drifted through a set of double doors nearby. Likely the great hall, where the older students were already seated for the start of term feast. Hazel's stomach fluttered, knowing that in moments she would be walking in front of all of them. Professor McGonagall turned to face the first years, her lips pressed into a prom but not unfriendly smile. "Welcome to Hogwarts," she said, and her voice echoed lightly off the stone walls. "In a few moments, you will enter the Great Hall and be sorted into your houses. Your house will be like your family here at Hogwarts. You will have classes with your housemates, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The four houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin." McGonagall continued crisply. "Each has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. Your triumphs will earn your house points, while any rule breaking will lose house points." Here she gave a slight, knowing look to the group. Hazel swallowed, making a mental note to be careful about rules. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor, McGonagall finished. Hazel listened intently. Despite McGonagall's formal tone, there was something reassuring about knowing these traditions. Hazel felt a spark of pride at the thought of contributing to her future house. McGonagall offered the first years a small, almost smile. "The sorting ceremony will begin shortly. I suggest you smarten yourselves up as much as you can while you are waiting." Her eyes drifted over a few students. Hazel instinctively patted her own hair and straightened her robes. She saw Olivia quickly tucking a stray curl behind her ear and standing a bit taller. "I shall return when we are ready for you," McGonagall said. With a final nod, she turned and entered the great hall, leaving the first years alone for a moment in the cavernous entrance hall. Immediately, soft whispers broke out among the new students. Hazel stood close to Olivia and sat down Misty's basket gently at her feet for a moment to give her arms a rest. The kitten was quietly observant, peering through the wicker slats with wide eyes. Some students looked very nervous. Clara, the girl from their boat, was biting her lip and fiddling with her sleeves. Others were bouncing on their toes in excitement, or whispering guesses about which houses they might be sorted into. Hazel herself felt a mixture of both nerves and excitement swirling inside her chest. "It will be okay," Olivia whispered to her, as if sensing her anxieties. Hazel nodded. "See you after, no matter what house," Hazel whispered back, giving Olivia's hand a quick squeeze. Before long, the doors to the great hall opened again, and Professor McGonagall reappeared, beckoning them to follow her in. Hazel quickly picked up Misty's basket again, whispering a promise that she'd see her soon. She wasn't sure if pets were allowed in the great hall, but since Misty was secure and quiet, she hoped it would be all right for this brief moment. They walked forward, out of the entryway, and into the great hall. Hazel had to concentrate on moving her feet because the sight before her was overwhelming in the most enchanting way. Thousands of candles floated in midair above four long tables where the rest of the students sat. All turned to watch the newcomers file in. The candles illuminated the hall in a warm, magical glow. High above, Hazel saw the ceiling, or rather she almost didn't see it at all. It looked exactly like the night sky, dotted with brilliant stars and a ghostly silver crescent moon. She remembered reading that the great hall's ceiling was bewitched to reflect the outside sky, but seeing it in person was awe-inspiring. At the front of the hall was another long table where the teachers sat. Hazel recognized a few of them from descriptions or photographs. There was Headmaster Dumbledore with his long white beard and half-moon spectacles, looking cheerful and serene as he watched the students. She spotted Professor Sprout, a stout witch with flyaway gray hair under a patched hat, who must be Hufflepuff's head of house. There was a severe-looking man with greasy black hair, who she guessed was Professor Snape, though he scarcely glanced up at the first years, seeming rather uninterested, and a tiny wizard with a shock of white hair barely visible over a stack of books, which had to be Professor Flitwick, the charms teacher. Hazel even saw what looked like a ghost hovering near one of the far walls, a pearly white figure gliding serenely. It only added to the surreal wonder of the scene. A low murmur ran through the older students as they craned to see the new arrivals, but Hazel didn't feel intimidated by their gazes. There was so much magic in the atmosphere that it felt as if a protective, excited energy filled the room, buoying her along. The first years came to a halt before the staff table, facing the rest of the school. In front of them, placed on a sturdy stool, was a very ancient, pointed wizard's hat. It was frayed and patched in several places, and as Hazel watched with held breath, the brim of the hat opened wide like a mouth. The hall quieted down, and the hat began to sing a song of welcome in a raspy, old voice, describing the traits of each house in whimsical rhyme. It sang of courage for Gryffindor, of loyalty and kindness for Hufflepuff, of wisdom and wit for Ravenclaw, and of ambition for Slytherin. Hazel listened intently, her nerves oddly soothed by the hat's playful rhyme. It ended its song with a call for the new students to step forward when their name was called, to don the hat and be sorted. Professor McGonagall now stepped forward, holding a long scroll of parchment. "When I call your name," she said clearly, "you will put on the hat and sit on the stool to be sorted into your house." Hazel felt her hands grip the handle of Misty's basket a little tighter. She hoped her name wouldn't be first. Thankfully, there were a few names before hers alphabetically. Abbott, Charles, called McGonagall first. A blond boy stumbled forward and put on the hat. After a few moments, the hat shouted, "Hufflepuff," and one of the tables, the one under the yellow banner, erupted into cheers and clapping as Charles hurried over to join them, looking relieved and happy. Hazel's heart pounded. She realized Olivia's surname was Green, which would come after her own, since Ashwood was near the top of the alphabet. Sure enough, after a few more students were sorted, Bones Edgar went to Ravenclaw, and Carter Priya became a Gryffindor, each house cheering in turn. Hazel heard Ashwood, Hazel. Hazel felt a jolt go through her. Olivia squeezed her arm quickly for courage. Hazel released Misty's basket handle, entrusting it to Olivia for a moment, and stepped forward on legs that felt like jelly yet somehow carried her steadily to the stool. Everything seemed to slow down. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, and the shuffling of the hat in Professor McGonagall's hands. Hazel sat down, and McGonagall placed the sorting hat gently upon her head. It slipped down over her eyes, nearly past the tip of her nose. All Hazel could see was the inside of the dark brim, and a sliver of the great hall floor beyond. She swallowed, wondering what would happen, when a small voice spoke in her ear, though the hat's mouth did not move externally. Said the hat, in a thoughtful whisper only Hazel could hear. "Very interesting. I see curiosity. Oh yes, plenty of that. A thirst to prove yourself, but no lack of loyalty either. Kind heart, and quite brave in your own quiet way. Where to put you?" Hazel thought her heart might burst. She dearly hoped the hat would choose a place where she could truly belong and be happy. "I want to find friends and learn everything I can," she thought fervently, wondering if the hat could read her thought. Friends and knowledge could do well in Ravenclaw. the hat mused in that soft voice. Hazel held her breath. But I sense your patience, your desire for community and fairness. There's a good mind here, certainly, but it's your kindness that stands out. Yes, better be. Hufflepuff, the hat suddenly proclaimed the last word loudly to the whole hall. Hazel felt a wave of relief and joy wash over her. The Hufflepuff table broke into applause and cheerful whoops. She lifted the hat off her head, grinning ear to ear, and placed it back on the stool for the next student. She glanced quickly to the line of first years and saw Olivia flash her a thumbs up, beaming. Hazel picked up Misty's basket again from where she had set it beside the stool and hurried over to the Hufflepuff table. As she approached, people scooted aside to make room. A few older students leaned over to shake her hand or pat her shoulder as she sat down.
Welcome to Hufflepuff, said a prefect with a shiny badge, smiling kindly. Hazel found herself seated next to a kind-looking girl with curly black hair, who looked a year or two older. I'm Sophie, second year, the girl whispered to Hazel. Congrats and welcome. Ooh. And who's this? Sophie had noticed Misty's basket as Hazel set it at her feet under the table. Hazel opened it briefly to let Misty peek, and Sophie giggled quietly. Adorable! She'll have fun exploring our common room.
Hazel felt so welcomed already that she could hardly believe she had ever worried about fitting in. She watched as the sorting continued. Not long after, Green, Olivia, was called. Hazel crossed her fingers tightly under the table. Olivia marched up to the stool. Looking determined, the hat was placed on her head. It considered only for a moment, before declaring Hufflepuff, loud and clear. Hazel clapped hard with her new housemates, as Olivia practically bounded down from the stool. Taking the hat off with a grin, she made her way to the Hufflepuff table, and to Hazel's delight slid into the seat right across from her. I hoped we'd be together, Hazel whispered happily. Me too, Olivia whispered back, eyes shining with excitement and relief. They would have hugged if the table wasn't between them. The sorting continued until the last name was called. Sabini, Livia, went to Slytherin, garnering polite applause from that table. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat and stool away. Headmaster Dumbledore then stood up from the center of the staff table, beaming at the students. He opened his arms wide in a welcoming gesture. To all of our new students, welcome. To all of our returning students, welcome back, he said, his voice joyous. Before we begin our feast, I would like to say just a few words. He paused, the hall falling silent with anticipation. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled as he spoke three nonsense words clearly. Netwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. Then he clapped his hands together once, smiling benignly. Thank you. Hazel giggled softly along with many others. The brief tension and formality that had hung in the air broke with laughter at the headmaster's silly proclamation. With that, Dumbledore sat down, and the feast officially began. Golden platters and bowls that had been empty moments before were now suddenly heaped with all manner of delicious foods, as though appearing out of thin air. Hazel gasped. She had read about the famous Hogwarts feasts, but experiencing it was something else entirely. The aromas of roast chicken, baked fish, buttery potatoes, and fresh bread rose around her, making her realize how hungry she was after the train ride. There were jugs of pumpkin juice and goblets for water, bowls of salad with jewel-bright tomatoes, tureens of rich stew, and dishes of roasted vegetables glazed with herb butter. Her housemates eagerly began serving themselves, and Hazel followed suit, realizing only now how her stomach growled. Olivia passed her a platter of shepherd's pie, and Hazel gratefully took a portion. Everything she tried was wonderful, warm, comforting, and flavorful. As she ate, conversation bubbled up around the table. The newly sorted Hufflepuffs introduced themselves to each other between bites. Hazel learned that Clara, the girl with the toad, who had now safely found her pet, Hazel spied a tiny toad head poking from Clara's robe pocket, was muggle-born like herself, and was a little overwhelmed, but very happy. The dark-haired boy from their boat introduced himself as Benjamin. He was half-blood and very friendly, already making a joke that the hat nearly put him in Gryffindor because he accidentally thought, not Slytherin too loudly. There was also a pair of twins, Alice and Amelia, both Hufflepuff first years with rosy cheeks and identical wide smiles. who explained they came from a wizarding farm family and were excited about caring for magical creatures someday. Older Hufflepuff students chimed in to welcome them and give little helpful tips. One of the prefects, the boy who greeted Hazel earlier, introduced himself as Henry and assured the first years that if they needed any help finding classes or had questions, they could approach him or the other prefects anytime. Another older student mentioned that Hufflepuff's head of house, Professor Sprout, was the herbology teacher and extremely kind, so they shouldn't hesitate to go to her if they ever needed anything or even just a chat. Hazel felt heartened hearing that. She had already had a good feeling about Professor Sprout from the glimpses of her at the staff table. Sprout had given a proud clap for each new Hufflepuff as they were sorted. During the feast, Hazel also noticed the Hufflepuff house ghost drift by to say hello. The fat friar, a jovial-looking spirit in monk's robes, floated between them and the neighboring Ravenclaw table. "Congratulations, my new badgers," he said merrily to the first years, giving them a courteous bow in midair. "Hope to see you all in the common room. Do let me know if I can help with anything, won't you?" His voice was kindly and a bit echoey. Hazel had never met a ghost before, and she found that instead of being spooky, he was actually quite comforting in his friendliness. As Hazel ate her fill, maybe more than her fill, of roasted chicken, creamy mashed parsnips, and a scrumptious savory tart that a third year told her was a classic recipe of the Hufflepuff house elves, she felt a deep contentment settle over her. Misty had dozed off again in her basket at Hazel's feet, which Hazel was grateful for. She peeked in and saw the kitten, curled up peacefully amid the folds of Hazel's travel cloak. Soon, the golden plates cleared themselves of the dinner courses and were replaced with desserts. Hazel's eyes widened anew at the sight of treacle tarts, puddings glazed with caramel sauce, trifles layered with fruit and cream, and bowls of assorted berries and oranges. She helped herself to a small slice of chocolate day too, and a spoonful of clotted cream, savoring the sweetness. Around her, students were happily chattering or sighing contentedly between bites of desserts. The hall was filled with happy chatter now. Up above, under the enchanted ceiling, a few clouds drifted across the starry sky, as if a gentle reminder of the late hour. Hazel realized she was pleasantly tired. What a full, extraordinary day it had been, and yet the atmosphere kept her comfortably awake, wrapped in the warmth of good food and companionship. Finally, when everyone seemed replete and content, Professor Dumbledore rose again. The hall quieted. Hazel felt a little thrill, realizing she was seated in this magnificent place among a new family, listening to the legendary wizard who ran the school. Dumbledore gave a few customary announcements, a reminder that the Forbidden Forest on the grounds was, as its name stated, forbidden to all students, and that certain items, dung bombs and fanged frisbees were among the things he mentioned, were banned in school corridors. His tone was light, almost joking on the latter, which made some students laugh and applaud. Hazel simply made a mental note to avoid whatever those were. He then warmly welcomed new students again, and wished everyone a good year of learning and discovery. With that, he concluded, "And now, bedtime awaits. Off you trot," adding a playful wink. The scraping of benches and a crescendo of chatter marked the end of the feast as students began to rise and depart. Hazel stood with the others, taking up Misty's basket once more and stretching her legs. She was excited to see the Hufflepuff common room that she'd heard about from the older. The word warmed Hazel from the inside. She exchanged an excited look with Olivia as they fell into step behind the older students, leaving the great hall. The Hufflepuff prefects led them through the bustling crowd of the entrance hall and down a quieter corridor branching off to one side. The castle was a maze of hallways and staircases, some of which even moved. As Hazel passed one staircase, she saw it creaking and rearranging itself slowly, which made her jaw drop in amazement. But she stayed close to the group. Torches cast flickering golden light on the stone walls, and portraits of people in old-fashioned clothes looked curiously at the passing first years. Hazel was delighted when one portrait of a lady in a frilly bonnet waved at her. She shyly waved back, and the lady gave a genteel nod. They descended a staircase leading down from the entrance hall, and then even further below ground level. Hazel recalled from Hogwarts a history that the Hufflepuff common room was somewhere near the kitchens, in a basement. Sure enough, the prefects guided them through a broad stone corridor that sloped gently downward. The smell of something sweet and doughy hung faintly in the air, likely coming from the kitchens further along. Hazel's nose twitched appreciatively. The aroma was comforting, like fresh baking bread. Finally, they reached a cozy, dimly lit nook in the corridor. In this nook stood a stack of large wooden barrels, 5 high and stacked 2 wide. To an unknowing eye, it might have looked like just a storeroom. The prefect leading them stopped here and turned to address the first years.
"All right, everyone," said Henry, the prefect. "This is the entrance to the Hufflepuff basement in our common room. Now pay close attention. Hufflepuff is the only house that doesn't need a password to enter, but we do have a secure method." He pointed to the barrel in the middle of the second row from the bottom. "You tap that barrel second from the bottom middle of the row in the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff like this."
He demonstrated by using his wand to tap the lid. Helga Hufflepuff. 4 taps and a distinctive pattern. The barrel's lid suddenly swung open, like a door on a hinge, revealing a round passageway just big enough to crawl through. A soft, earthy smell wafted out, and Hazel thought she caught a hint of something floral, like honeysuckle. "If you get it wrong," added a female prefect with a wink, "you'll get a nice little vinegar shower. So be careful, and remember the rhythm. It's pretty easy, though." Some first years chuckled nervously, thinking she was joking, but Hazel suspected it was true, and indeed she recalled reading that Hufflepuff's barrel would douse any unwelcome intruder with vinegar. She made a mental note of the correct barrel and rhythm. One by one, they crawled through the circular entrance behind the prefects. Hazel went in carefully on her hands and knees, ducking her head and moving through the barrel passage with Olivia right behind her. The passage was snug and earthy, and it sloped slightly upward. After a short crawl, Hazel emerged into the Hufflepuff common room and immediately felt enveloped by warmth and cheer. She stepped aside to make room for Olivia and the others to come through, and slowly turned around to take it all in, her eyes shining with delight. The room was round and low-ceilinged, with a comfortable, earthy atmosphere like that of a cozy burrow. The walls were paneled in honey-colored wood and adorned with hanging plants and copper lamps that cast a soft golden glow everywhere. There were lots of round, warm-colored rugs on the stone floor, many comfortable-looking sofas and armchairs, overstuffed and upholstered in shades of yellow and deep black patterned fabrics, like bumblebee colors, were arranged in welcoming clusters. A few cheerful tapestries, depicting landscapes with whimsical badgers frolicking and dancing, hung between small circular windows. The windows. Hazel noticed that along one curved wall there were several small round windows set just at ground level. Through them she could see the dark outline of grass and the night sky beyond, dotted with a few stars. It dawned on her that the common room was underground, with windows opening out to ground level on the school lawns. It gave the room a tucked-away feeling, but not an enclosed one. In the daytime, Hazel imagined, sunlight would filter through those windows onto the floor and beam. Even now, the faint silver of moonlight mixed with the lamplight, and she could see a few dandelions closed up for the night just outside the glass. Leaf plants were everywhere. Verdant vines and trailing ivy hung from copper pots on the ceiling, their leaves brushing gently against the top of a tall Hufflepuff 7th year's head as he walked by. Potted flowers and succulents sat on the windowsills, some of them quietly moving. Hazel did a delighted double take as a daisy turned its head as if to follow her motion, and a cluster of ferns near the fireplace seemed to be softly swaying despite the absence of a breeze. Opposite the barrel entrance they had climbed through, Hazel saw a big, inviting fireplace with a mantel of golden oak wood, carved with an intricate pattern of dancing badgers. Above it hung a portrait of a kindly-looking woman in medieval dress, who could only be Helga Hufflepuff herself. In the portrait, Helga raised a tiny golden cup in a toast and smiled warmly as the students came in. The fire crackling in the hearth cast flickers of light on the patchwork of footstools and plump cushions scattered on the hearthrug. Hazel felt an immediate sense of belonging and ease. A few other Hufflepuffs who had already been in the common room, likely some older students who had left the feast a bit early or had stayed behind, waved or called quiet greetings as the first years entered. One was a girl with short, spiky hair that kept changing colors, from violet to turquoise as Hazel watched, astonished, who looked familiar. And then Hazel realized with a little thrill that it was Nymphadora Tonks, a well-known Hufflepuff third-year metamorphmagus Olivia had mentioned on the train. Tonks grinned and gave them a playful salute from where she lounged in an armchair, but quickly put a finger to her lips in a shushing motion with a wink, reminding them perhaps that it was late and time to wind down. The prefects gathered the first years around once more, in the center of the room. Boys' dormitories are through that door, Henry explained, pointing to a circular wooden door set in the wall on one side of the common room, and girls through that one, indicating a similar door on the opposite side. Both doors were round and blended into the wall so well that Hazel might not have noticed them except for small bronze plaques above each, labeled boys and girls. You'll find your trunks have been brought up and placed in your rooms already, Henry added with a reassuring smile. Hazel realized with delight that indeed her trunk, which she had left in the boat, was nowhere to be seen here, which meant it must have been delivered to her dormitory by some efficient, probably magical means, perhaps even the Hogwarts house elves. It was a strange but comforting thought. Her belongings were already waiting for her upstairs. The prefect continued. Dormitories are also round rooms, with beds and your names posted on them. First years you'll see first year girls on one side and first year boys on the other. Head in, find your bed with your name on it. We keep our dormitories secure and cozy. No passwords needed here either. He gave a little smile. Hazel remembered reading that some houses required passwords for dorm stairs, like Gryffindor's girls' staircase. Bathrooms are attached to your dorms and shared among your year. Get a good night's sleep. Big day of classes tomorrow. If you need anything, I'll be up for a little while longer. And I'm just in the 5th year boys' dorm, so don't hesitate to knock or ask any older student you see around. We're all happy to help. That's the Hufflepuff way. With kind smiles and a few more welcomes, the older students began to disperse. The first years, now drooping with exhaustion despite their excitement, made their way to their respective dorm doors. Hazel picked up Misty's basket again and followed Olivia and the other girls through the rounded wooden door into the first-year girls' dormitory. Inside, the dormitory was just as cozy as the common room. It was a circular chamber draped with soft yellow hangings, and more of those gentle copper lamps glowing low on the walls. 5 comfortable 4-poster beds, each hung with thick patchwork quilts in a riot of warm colors, were spaced evenly around the walls. At the foot of each bed sat a wooden trunk, and Hazel immediately spotted hers, polished oak with the initials HA, at one of the beds. Just as promised, small nightstands next to each bed held little oil lamps turned low, giving just enough light to see by. The ceiling here was also low and slightly domed, adding to the snug feeling, and Hazel noticed another small round window set between 2 beds, showing the dark outside and a sprinkle of stars near the ground level. Each bed looked inviting beyond Hazel's wildest dreams, and she felt an almost irresistible urge to dive right into the nearest one. But first, there were nightly routines to attend to. She set Misty's basket down and opened it. Misty peeked out cautiously, then hopped onto the wooden floor, sniffing around this new, unfamiliar environment. "Stay nearby, sweetie," Hazel whispered. The kitten padded softly under the nearest bed and back out, apparently satisfied that everything was safe, and then immediately leapt onto Hazel's bed, circling atop the thick quilt before settling down as if claiming it as her own. Hazel and the other girls laughed quietly at the sight. Olivia, who had entered behind Hazel, found her own bed right next to Hazel's, much to both their happiness. She was already unlacing her boots with weary fingers. "What a day," she murmured through a yawn, giving Hazel a sleepy smile. The other 3 girls in their dorm, Clara and the twins Alice and Amelia, were equally as sleepy and happy. Clara, who had retrieved her little toad, named Hops, who was now sitting contentedly in her robe pocket, was gently making him a soft nest out of a handkerchief on her nightstand. The twins were helping each other braid their long brown hair for sleep, whispering about how amazing everything was. Hazel changed into her pajamas behind the privacy of her bed's curtains. They were simple, soft, cotton pajamas that her mother had packed, but never had they felt more comforting. After freshening up quickly in the adjoining bathroom, which had a round wooden door of its own, inside were neat little sinks with polished mirrors and a row of clawfoot tubs that promised warm baths another time. Hazel returned to her bed. She found that a copper bed warmer hung on a hook nearby, something she had read about. Hufflepuffs had these to warm the sheets on cold nights. Tonight, with summer not yet fully faded, it wasn't needed, but just seeing it there, an old-fashioned, thoughtful comfort, made Hazel smile. Everything about this place was designed for warmth and coziness. Misty was purring loudly, curled at the foot of Hazel's bed, kneading the quilt with her tiny paws. Hazel gently scooped the kitten up and placed her by the pillow instead, so she wouldn't accidentally be kicked in the night. Misty accepted this relocation with a small, sleepy chirp, then nestled down next to Hazel's pillow, her purring resuming like a soft little engine. Olivia whispered across from her, "Good night, Hazel," as she drew her own bed curtains partially closed. "Good night, Olivia," Hazel whispered back, peeking out from her covers. Clara and the twins murmured goodnights as well throughout the softly lit room. Hazel took one last look around the cozy round dormitory. The lamplight was dim now. One of the prefects must have turned down the main lamp to a low glow, leaving the room illuminated mostly by the gentle flicker from the fireplace in the common room beyond their open door, and a faint moonbeam through the window. She could hear the faint crackle of the fires still going outside in the common room, and distant muffled voices of a few older students lingering by the hearth. It was a comforting murmur, like the sound of family in the next room. Misty snuggled into the crook of Hazel's arm, and Hazel stroked the kitten's silky fur. She felt utterly safe and content. What a far cry from that morning, leaving home, stepping into the unknown. Now she felt she had found another home entirely, one filled with magic and kindness. As Hazel closed her eyes, she thought of the beautiful castle above them, and everything that awaited in the days to come. There would be classes, spells to learn, hallways to explore. There would be mornings waking up to sunlight through those round windows, and nights falling asleep to the lullaby of crackling fires and friendly whispers. And best of all, she already had a friend to share it with, and likely more friends to come. Her last thought, before drifting off, was a simple, happy one. "I'm home." With that warm certainty wrapped around her like an extra blanket, Hazel Ashwood slipped into a deep, gentle sleep, her first night at Hogwarts quiet and sweet, while the castle settled into silence under the watch of the moon. The next morning, Hazel woke to pale sunlight filtering through the round window and across her patchwork quilt. For a blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then Misty's gentle paw batting at a stray thread on the quilt brought her back. She sat up in bed and smiled, remembering with a rush of joy that she was at Hogwarts. The first day of classes was about to begin. Around the dormitory, the other girls were also stirring, rubbing their eyes and yawning. The twins, Alice and Amelia, were already up and quietly chattering as they pulled on their uniforms, excited for the day. Olivia peeked out from behind her bed curtains, her hair adorably mussed from sleep, and gave Hazel a grin. "Morning, Hazel," she whispered. "Morning," Hazel replied softly, her voice still thick with sleep, but cheerful. She stretched her arms above her head and slid out of bed, her feet touching the cool wooden floor. Misty mewed in mild complaint at the disturbance, then promptly hopped down to follow Hazel around as she began to get ready. The girls, dressed in their fresh school uniforms, white shirts, gray skirts or trousers, and black robes with the Hufflepuff yellow lining. Hazel took particular care in fastening her Hufflepuff tie, feeling a swell of pride at the little embroidered badger near the bottom. Olivia helped her straighten it, and Hazel couldn't help but notice how well the golden yellow color suited her friend's rosy complexion. After washing up and smoothing each other's collars and hair, Olivia deftly tucked a stubborn strand behind Hazel's ear, and Hazel helped rebraid a section of Olivia's hair. They gathered their books into their school satchels. Hazel double-checked her class schedule, which she had found posted on the notice board in the common room earlier that morning. First class today, herbology with Professor Sprout, in Greenhouse 1, just outside the castle. "I'm so glad we have herbology first," whispered Clara, as they met her by the common room door. Clara had her toad hop safely in a little pocket terrarium now. "I think it'll be a gentle start to things." Clara loved gardening, it turned out, which made her eager but also a little less nervous about her first lesson. Hazel couldn't agree more. Proceeding out of the common room, the first-year Hufflepuffs were greeted by the cheerful bustle of the castle morning. Other students were emerging from various corridors, heading to breakfast. They followed the flow up to the great hall, where the enchanted ceiling now showed a bright blue sky dotted with a few puffy white clouds. Breakfast was a relaxed affair. Hazel and Olivia sat with their housemates at the Hufflepuff table, enjoying porridge with brown sugar, buttery toast with marmalade, and cups of warm tea. Hazel even slipped Misty a small strip of bacon from her napkin. She had decided to let Misty stay in the dorm for the day, but the kitten had accompanied them to breakfast in her basket. Misty, nestled discreetly in Hazel's satchel under the bench, accepted the treat with a tiny pleased manner pea, making Hazel smile. Owls swooped in delivering mail as they ate, and Hazel watched in delight as a flurry of post owls of all colors and sizes circled the rafters. One large barn owl dropped a copy of the Daily Prophet right in front of a student down the table with impressive accuracy. Another tiny screech owl delivered a note to someone at the Ravenclaw table, drawing excited whispers from her friends. Hazel had no mail yet. She had only left home yesterday, after all. But Olivia received a short letter from her brother, wishing her luck, delivered by her own owl Orion, who swooped down to her shoulder affectionately for a moment before flying off to the owlery. After breakfast, the Hufflepuff first years gathered their things and headed out across the dew-dappled grounds toward the greenhouses for herbology, as indicated by their schedules. The morning air was crisp and fresh. The grass sparkled with leftover droplets of early morning dew. Hazel breathed in the scent of damp earth and distant wildflowers, feeling invigorated. The sun had risen fully, casting a pleasant warmth on their backs as they walked. Bees buzzed lazily among late-blooming clover along the path, and somewhere in the distance, Hazel heard the soft cluck of what sounded like Hagrid's chickens near his hut. It was all so peaceful and alive. Greenhouse 1 was a large glass structure just a short walk from the castle, one of several that stood in a tidy row near the vegetable patches and pumpkin patch. Hazel saw enormous pumpkins, the size of boulders which she suspected were Hagrid's growing nearby. Inside the greenhouse, Hazel found it humid and full of the rich smell of soil and green, growing things. Long wooden tables were lined with pots of various magical plants. Some had leaves that shivered or swayed gently as if moved by an unseen breeze. A few plants had colorful blooms with faces like little smiling pansies, while others had curious quivering vines. Professor Sprout greeted them with muddy gardening gloves on, and a bright smile that crinkled the corners of her kind eyes. She still wore her patched hat, adorned with a few tiny flowers that seemed to sprout from it. Hazel wondered if they were part of the hat, or live blooms that Sprout had tucked there, fresh this morning. "Good morning, everyone. Come in, dears. Don't be shy," Sprout said in a hearty, cheerful voice. "Gather round a table. 2 to a pot, please." "That's right." Hazel and Olivia paired up at a station in front of a large terracotta pot containing a bushy plant with navy blue flowers. The blossoms trembled slightly as if quaking with contained energy. Next to them, Clara was with one of the twins, gently sniffing a fragrant herb-scented fern on their table. Professor Sprout explained that in today's lesson they would be learning to care for fanged geraniums, a whimsical species of magical geranium that had tiny, tooth-like petals capable of giving a mild nip if not handled carefully. Hazel peered at their plant and indeed saw a set of little white tooth-like protrusions on a few of the blossoms, giving them the appearance of grinning. "Now, fanged geraniums aren't dangerous, but they can give you a bit of a pinch if you startle them," Sprout said merrily. "The key is a gentle approach. Think of it like petting a cat, perhaps." She winked at Hazel, having noticed Misty's green eyes peeping out of Hazel's satchel. Sprout, as head of Hufflepuff, likely recognized Hazel and her kitten from the previous night's sorting. Hazel blushed and gave a tiny nod. Following Sprout's demonstration, each pair of students donned a pair of protective dragonhide gloves and gently began pruning and feeding their plants. Hazel was delighted to find that when she stroked a leaf softly, the plant responded with a quiver and then relaxed its previously stiff stems. Olivia carefully used her pruning shears to trim a dead blossom, and when one of the blooms turned as if to nip at her fingers, Hazel lightly tapped the pot and murmured soothingly to the geranium. It calmed down, almost purring in its own plant-like way. Hazel could swear she heard a soft rustling sound that seemed happy, as Hazel added a sprinkle of rich, dark soil from a bucket to its pot. Sunlight poured in through the greenhouse panes, illuminating motes of dust and pollen dancing in the air. The class was calm and engaging. The only sounds were Sprout's encouraging comments, the snip-snip of shears and occasional giggles when a plant acted up. Clara let out a tiny at one point when her geranium playfully tugged at the hem of her robe with a leafy tendril. Professor Sprout chuckled and helped untangle it, praising Clara for having the magic touch. "My dear, looks like it likes you." By the end of the class, all the students had successfully tended to their geraniums, which indeed looked happier. If a plant could look happy, Hazel thought these certainly did. They stood a bit taller, their flowers open and vibrant. Professor Sprout clapped her hands together. "Well done, everyone. 10 points to Hufflepuff for a splendid first lesson," she announced, eyes twinkling as she looked around at them. The Hufflepuffs beamed at one another. Points already on day one. Hazel felt a warm glow of accomplishment as they left the greenhouse, a faint scent of earth and floral sap clinging pleasantly to their robes. Their next class was Charms in one of the castle classrooms. Hazel and Olivia made their way up from the greenhouse and gardens along corridors lined with portraits that chatted among themselves or snoozed in their frames. The girls compared their schedules as they walked, noticing that Charms would be with the Ravenclaw first years. Hazel was glad it would be interesting to meet some students from another house in class. The Charms classroom was situated on the 3rd floor, and by the time Hazel and her classmates found it, a small gaggle of Ravenclaw first years was already waiting outside, including a tall boy eagerly practicing wand movements in the air. Hazel also recognized the curly-haired Ravenclaw girl who had been sorted just before Olivia. Her name was Priya Carter. Priya gave Hazel a polite smile, likely remembering her from the sorting line. Hazel had clapped for her when she became a Gryffindor, not Ravenclaw, as Hazel mistakenly recalled. Soon, Professor Flitwick, a tiny wizard, who was so short he barely reached Hazel's shoulder, welcomed them in with a squeaky but enthusiastic, "Come in, come in." He had to stand on a stack of books to see over his desk, which made several students, including Hazel, smile, not out of disrespect, but because his presence was so cheerful and endearing. Charms class began with Professor Flitwick explaining the importance of proper pronunciation and wrist movement in casting spells. Today's lesson: the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa. Hazel's pulse quickened with excitement. This was a spell she had heard of, and even seen depicted in drawings. One of those iconic basic spells. To actually perform magic like that felt truly like stepping into the stories she cherished. They were given feathers to practice on, one per pair, and Hazel found herself paired with a Ravenclaw girl, because there was an even mix of their houses. Olivia partnered with a Ravenclaw boy behind them. Hazel's partner was a friendly girl named Marigold, with bright ginger hair and a spattering of freckles. The classroom buzzed with murmurs of Wingardium Leviosa as students repeated the incantation and tried the wand movement, a swish and flick. At first, Hazel struggled. She swished a bit too vigorously, and her feather only twitched on the desk. Next to her, Marigold got frustrated and accidentally sent their feather hopping a few inches before it fell back down, which made them both giggle and relax a little. Professor Flitwick trotted over to their table upon hearing their laughter. "Having fun, ladies?" he asked with a smile that made his mustache twitch. He had a high-pitched voice that somehow managed to be both kind and comical. "Let's see that wand movement again, Miss Ashwood." Hazel nodded, biting her lip in concentration. She performed a slow, deliberate swish and flick, just as he'd shown, focusing on making it graceful. "Wingardium Leviosa," she said clearly, envisioning the feather rising. This time, to her delight, the feather rose off the desk, floating a good foot in the air. Hazel's heart soared along with it. Marigold gasped happily. Flitwick let out a gleeful, high-pitched ho-ho. "Well done indeed." Startled by the exclamation, Hazel lost her focus for a second, and the feather drifted down gently into Marigold's cupped hands. But Flitwick clapped anyway. "Excellent work. That's 5 points for Hufflepuff and 5 for Ravenclaw for a successful partnership," he announced. Hazel felt her cheeks warm with pride as Marigold beamed proudly. Around the room, other students were beginning to get it too. Olivia Olivia and her partner had managed to keep their feather hovering between them for a full minute. One of the Hufflepuff boys at the back accidentally launched his feather straight up to the ceiling, prompting Professor Flitwick to levitate himself atop his stack of books to retrieve it, much to everyone's quiet amusement. The little professor gave a delighted chuckle as he floated back down. Through it all, the atmosphere remained supportive and lighthearted. By the end of Charms class, Hazel felt a growing confidence blooming inside her. She had successfully performed her first real spell in a classroom setting, and it had been wonderful seeing magic happen by her own doing. The class concluded with Flitwick encouraging them to practice safely on their own time, but not to try levitating each other or any living creatures just yet. "We don't want any unfortunate incidents. No floating classmates in the corridors, please," he squeaked, making them all laugh. After Charms, they had a short break. Hazel and Olivia strolled together through the corridor toward their next class, Transfiguration. Olivia was reenacting the tall Ravenclaw boy's over-exaggerated wand flourish from class, and giggling. Apparently the boy had kept saying Wingardium Leviosa and making their feather explode in puffs of fluff. To Professor Flitwick's gentle chagrin, Hazel laughed, covering her mouth, feeling light and happy as they climbed a staircase. Already the castle was starting to feel familiar in little ways. The echo of footsteps on stone, the ever-present scent of old books and something sweet, perhaps lingering from the kitchen, the friendly ghosts that sometimes passed by. They had just seen nearly headless Nick drifting through a wall, humming to himself. In the Transfiguration classroom, on the first floor, tall windows let in bright midday light. On each desk was a small wooden matchstick. Hazel had read about this lesson. They would attempt to turn a matchstick into a metal needle. Professor McGonagall, now in her teaching robes and square spectacles, stood at the front with her wand in hand, already writing instructions on the blackboard in tidy script. Her demeanor in class was brisk and serious, but Hazel still sensed an undercurrent of pride when she looked at the new students, particularly her own Hufflepuffs. McGonagall began by giving them a stern pep talk about the complexity of transfiguration, emphasizing precision and concentration above all. Then, with a wave of her wand, she demonstrated how to change a match into a perfect, shiny silver needle. It happened in the blink of an eye. The match twisted and gleamed into a new form. The class oohed softly. Attempting it themselves proved challenging. Hazel furrowed her brow, focusing all her will on her matchstick, as she repeated the incantation, Transfiguro, a simple practice word for beginners. At first, nothing happened. She tried again, envisioning the needle in her mind as clearly as she could. Her matchstick quivered, and the tip turned a silvery gray, but the rest remained stubbornly wooden. It was only a partial transformation, but it was progress. Professor McGonagall swept by, observing each attempt with a keen eye. When she saw Hazel's half-transformed match, she gave the tiniest nod of approval. "Good. A bit more focus on the form, Miss Ashwood," she advised quietly, tapping the match once with her wand to straighten it. Hazel realized her half-needle had drooped comically. Encouraged, Hazel tried once more, and at last her matchstick shrank and gleamed entirely, albeit a bit crookedly, as a silver needle. Olivia also managed a full transfiguration on her third try, and they exchanged proud grins across their adjacent desks. McGonagall allowed herself a rare smile to the class. When a majority of the students managed to transfigure at least part of their matchsticks. "Transfiguration is very difficult magic," she said, "and you've made a solid start. Remember, never attempt transfiguring complex or living things until you have mastered the basics." As they left Transfiguration, Hazel felt mentally a bit tired. The concentration required was intense, but also gratified by their achievements so far. It was only late morning, but so much had happened. Lunch was a welcome break. Back at the Great Hall, they enjoyed bowls of hearty soup and ham sandwiches. Hazel found herself animatedly chatting with Olivia and a couple of Hufflepuff boys about their classes so far. One boy, Jeremy, admitted he had accidentally turned his matchstick into a toothpick instead of a needle, and joked that at least he had something useful for after meals. They all chuckled into their goblets of pumpkin juice. In the afternoon, the first years had history of magic, widely rumored to be the sleepiest class at Hogwarts. and indeed it lived up to that reputation. The lesson was held in a dim, dusty classroom on the second floor, and the teacher, Professor Binns, was a ghost who, as legend had it, had one day simply gotten up to teach after a nap, leaving his body behind. Sure enough, Binns drifted through the blackboard and began lecturing in a flat, droning voice about ancient goblin rebellions. Hazel took out her quill and parchment with the best of intentions to take notes, but found her eyelids growing heavy and her quill hand slowing as the minutes ticked by. Around her, many classmates were stifling yawns. Next to Hazel, Olivia actually did nod off for a minute, her quill making a wandering squiggle across her parchment. Hazel gently nudged her awake, and they shared a silent, amused look of commiseration. Even Ben's inflection never changed. His transparent form hovered near the chalkboard as he recited dates and names in that soft, unchanging drone. Hazel managed to jot down a few key points. Rebellion of 1612. A place called Hogsmeade mentioned. Her ears perked at that familiar name. However, by the end of the hour, she had only half a page of notes and a strong desire for fresh air. As they filed out, Hazel whispered to Olivia, "I think I might have fallen asleep if he had gone on about goblin rebellions for one more minute." Olivia suppressed a laugh, covering her mouth. "I know I would have," she replied, showing Hazel her parchment, which was mostly doodles of goblin hats and a few lines of actual notes. Their final class of the day was potions. In the dungeons, the atmosphere shifted as they descended the stone steps underground. The air was noticeably cooler and carried a faint smell of burnt herbs and something sharp like vinegar. Hazel pulled her robes a bit tighter around herself. Inside the potions classroom, lanterns cast a low amber glow over rows of desks set up like workstations, each with a brass cauldron and set of scales. Shelves lining the walls held mysterious jars of ingredients, floating animal bits and liquids, dried herbs tied in bunches, sparkling powders, and pickled plant roots. It was fascinating and a little eerie. Professor Snape glided into the room, black cloak billowing, quieting the already subdued first years further with his mere presence. He had an intimidating aura, and when he called roll, he paused upon Hazel's name, giving her a brief unreadable look from across the room, before continuing through the list. Snape wasted no time with pleasantries. In a silky, low voice that made everyone lean in to hear, he began to speak about the subtle science and exact art of potion making. Hazel listened intently, both eager to learn and keenly aware that this class would demand her utmost attention. They were to brew a simple boil-cure potion today, he announced. Something straightforward to start with, though his tone suggested that even this could be easily botched if they were careless. Hazel partnered with Clara for this class, sharing a cauldron between them. Each pair of lab stations was shared by two. They gathered ingredients from the student store cupboard at the back. Dried nettles, crushed snake fangs, already powdered, thankfully, a bit of stewed horned slugs in a jar, which Hazel tried not to make a face at as she measured it out, and porcupine quills to add at the very end of brewing. As they worked through the recipe steps from their textbook, Magical Drafts and Potions, Hazel found the process oddly soothing despite Snape's prowling presence among the aisles. By the flickering light of their cauldron's bluebell flames, they added ingredients in order and stirred carefully as directed. The potion in their pewter cauldron gradually turned a shade of turquoise as described in the book. Now and then, Snape would sweep past a table, his black robes rustling, and make a curt comment or point out a mistake. When one nervous Gryffindor stirred his cauldron counterclockwise instead of clockwise, Snape appeared behind him as if from nowhere and hissed, "Can you not follow simple instructions?" which made the boy nearly drop his stirring rod. Hazel kept her head down and focused, determined not to draw his ire. Clara measured the crushed snake fangs diligently, while Hazel watched the clock for timing. 3 clockwise stirs now, Hazel whispered, recalling the instructions. Clara nodded, her hand trembling slightly as Snape drifted by behind them. With one final stir, their potion settled into a pastel blue and let off a small wisp of greenish steam that matched the book's description for a correct boil-cure potion. Snape came around to inspect their cauldron. Hazel held her breath as he peered in. His dark eyes narrowed. "Acceptable," he murmured softly. Was that a hint of approval? It was hard to tell with him, but at least he hadn't sneered, nor deducted points. So Hazel allowed herself to exhale in relief. A moment later, he addressed the class. "In general, Those whose potions are correctly brewed should have a turquoise result by now. Bottle a sample, label it, and bring it to my desk. Hazel and Clara exchanged a quick, pleased look, and proceeded to ladle a bit of their potion into a glass vial. By the end of potions, Hazel felt a bit drained, but proud that they had navigated the class without any mishaps. One Gryffindor boy had unfortunately melted his cauldron bottom by adding the porcupine quills too early, resulting in a spilled mess of boiling goo and a cold, withering stare from Snape that promised detention. Hazel was glad to have avoided any such disaster. She and Clara quietly cleaned their station with scourgifying wipes provided at each desk, and then, finally, the first day of classes was done. Emerging from the dungeon into the late afternoon light was like resurfacing from underwater. Hazel, Olivia, and Clara stepped out into the courtyard, breathing in the warmer, fresher air. The sun was starting its descent, casting a golden glow on the stone walls of the castle. Students milled about the courtyard and corridors, some done for the day like them, and some heading to later classes. A few older students were hurrying toward greenhouses for an evening. Herbology, and Hazel overheard mention of astronomy classes for older years after dinner. The Hufflepuff girls decided to drop their books back in their dorm before dinner. As they made their way through the corridors, Hazel felt a happy weariness in her bones. It was the kind of tiredness that follows a day full of new experiences and hard work, and it felt satisfying. After a hearty dinner and a little time spent relaxing in the common room, during which Hazel regaled some second years with the tale of Professor Flitwick levitating to catch a rogue feather, which made them laugh, the Hufflepuff first years prepared for their astronomy lesson that was scheduled for that night at midnight.
Indeed, that very night, Hazel and the other first-year students would have their first astronomy class, shortly before 11 o'clock. The first years gathered sleepily but eagerly in the entrance hall, clad in their warmest robes. Professor Sinistra, a serene-looking witch with a long midnight blue cloak spangled with tiny stars, met them there. With a quiet smile and a lit wand to guide the way, she led them up a steep spiral staircase that wound endlessly upward into the highest tower of the castle. Their footsteps echoed softly off the stone walls, and Hazel felt Misty's absence keenly naturally. Pets had to be left in dorms at this late hour, so Misty was snug in bed.
Finally, they emerged, through a small door, onto the open ramparts of the astronomy tower. Hazel gasped, quietly, both from the sight and the sudden coolness. The night was crystal clear and cold, and the stars above were strewn across the sky like shimmering diamonds on black velvet. The full moon hung low and silver over the horizon, bathing the tower top in pale light. A gentle breeze whispered around the crenellated parapets, though Professor Sinistra had arranged a few heating charms that enveloped the area in a bubble of relative warmth. Arranged around the battlements were several brass telescopes on tripods, one for every pair of students. Hazel partnered with Olivia, who gave her an excited, if drowsy grin. The classmates spoke in hushed murmurs as if at any moment they might disturb the sleeping castle or the twinkling stars themselves. Professor Sinistra's voice was soft, yet carried clearly in the stillness. "Welcome to astronomy," she said, her breath visible in the chill air. "Look around you. Tonight the sky has been kind enough to give us a beautiful view for our first session." She gestured upward with a slim hand, and Hazel followed her motion to a brilliant constellation glittering directly above. "That is Orion, the hunter." And there she pointed south. Sirius, the dog star, the brightest star in the winter sky. Hazel tilted her head back, as far as it would go, her eyes tracing patterns among the stars that she had only seen in books until now. The Milky Way arced overhead, a faint milky band. From this height, all the grounds below were spread out in dark stillness, with only tiny lights from the castle windows and the occasional torch by Hagrid's cabin punctuating the gloom. The beauty of it made her heart swell with a kind of quiet joy. They spent the lesson learning to calibrate their telescopes and identifying a few key celestial bodies. Hazel's fingers felt a bit numb, adjusting the focus knobs of the telescope, but she was too enthralled to mind. When she peered through the eyepiece at the moon, she could see its craters and seas in sharp relief, glowing stark white against the darkness. With another lens adjustment, she located Jupiter, a steady golden disk, and even believed she glimpsed 3 of its moons as tiny pinpricks lined up beside it. Olivia found the Orion Nebula with Professor Sinistra's help, a hazy patch of luminous starlight. Just below Orion's belt, they each took turns gazing at it, marveling at how ancient and distant the light was that now met their eyes. Apart from the quiet, patient instructions from Professor Sinistra, and the occasional gasp of wonder from a student, the tower was peaceful. The only constant sounds were the gentle crackle of portable heater torches that Professor had set up to keep them from freezing, and the soft hoot of an owl flying past on its nocturnal hunt. Hazel wondered if it might be one of the school owls on a late delivery run, or perhaps just a wild barn owl from the forest. The stillness of the night and the grandeur of the sky wrapped around them, and Hazel felt an immense calm. Any anxieties from the day seemed very small under the vast eternity of stars. The universe stretched above and around her, and in that moment, atop the highest tower at midnight, Hazel felt both humbly small and yet intricately connected to everything. At one point, Professor Sinistra had them pause and simply look up with their naked eyes. "Breathe in the night air," she said quietly. Hazel did, filling her lungs with cold, fresh air that smelled faintly of pine and distant wood smoke. This is as much a part of your education as charts and equations, learning to appreciate the grandeur of the universe. You are all part of it after all. Hazel glanced at Olivia, who was gazing heavenward with a soft, dreamy smile. Hazel mirrored it, standing on the tallest tower of Hogwarts, side by side with her friend, under an endless sky. She felt an overwhelming sense of peace and belonging to her school, to her friends, to the world, and to the stars above. All too soon, the lesson came to an end. The professor had them each note down the positions of Jupiter and a few constellations on star charts. Hazel made a small sketch of Orion and labeled Sirius and Betelgeuse proudly. Then Professor Sinistra collected their parchment logs with a satisfied nod. "Well done tonight, everyone," she said in her gentle voice. "Now off to bed with you. Mind your step on the way down." The journey back through the chill, silent castle corridors was almost dreamlike. More than one student was nodding off as they walked. Hazel herself had to stifle a yawn or two as the adrenaline of stargazing ebbed. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning by the time they reached the Hufflepuff common room again. Hazel tiptoed into her dormitory, where Misty awoke, stretching in a loaf shape on Hazel's pillow, and gave a questioning little chirp. Hazel giggled softly and whispered, "You wouldn't believe how beautiful it was, Misty," while changing into her warmest pajamas. The kitten sniffed Hazel's robe, perhaps catching the scent of night air and telescope brass, then hopped down to Hazel's lap as she sat on the bed to unbraid her hair. Hazel slid under her quilt, her body thankful for the warmth and rest. Her cheeks still held a slight chill, but inside she was warm with wonder. Misty patted in a circle and then curled up right against Hazel's side, purring a deep, droning purr. As Hazel closed her eyes that night, she could still picture the countless stars above and feel the gentle weight of that quiet sky on her soul. The experience itself was a lullaby. In the stillness of the Hufflepuff dormitory, with the soft snores of her friends around her and Misty's gentle purr by her ear, Hazel drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, the memory of starlight soothing her with the promise that this castle held endless wonders she had yet to discover. In the weeks that followed, Hazel quickly grew fond of the rhythms of Hogwarts life. Each morning, she woke to the soft glow of sunrise through the low dormitory windows and the sound of her dorm mates bustling about. She would get dressed in the gentle hush, often sharing quiet chatter with Olivia about the dreams they'd had or what the first class of the day might be. They would all traipse up to breakfast together, sometimes still brushing traces of sleep from their eyes, but always eager for the day's new lessons. After classes, afternoons brought study sessions in the library or cozy free time in the common room. Evenings were for winding down by the fire, completing homework with quills, scratching parchment, sharing stories, or playing a relaxed game of wizard chess on the plush rug. Hazel loved those evenings, especially the common room. Truly was the coziest place imaginable. She would curl up in a squashy armchair after dinner, a soft blanket over her lap, and Misty purring contentedly on her knees, and work on her homework by lantern light. Around her, clusters of Hufflepuffs chatted in low voices or helped each other with assignments. Sometimes Professor Sprout would pop in before curfew just to see that her badgers were doing well, occasionally dropping off a plate of cookies from the kitchen or a basket of crisp apples for them to snack on. On weekends, the pace was gentler. Hazel spent Saturday mornings sleeping in a little, then perhaps wandering the grounds with friends if the weather was fair. Early October at Hogwarts was stunning. The leaves in the Forbidden Forest turned shades of copper and gold. The air smelled of wood smoke from Hagrid's hut, and the skies were often a clear, mellow blue. Often on weekends, Olivia, Hazel, and some of their Hufflepuff friends would take afternoon walks around the Black Lake, bundled in their new house scarves and sweaters if there was a chill. On one such walk, they skipped stones across the lake's smooth surface and laughed as Misty, who trotted along on a little harness Hazel had bought in Hogsmeade to safely bring her outside, tried to paw at the drifting autumn leaves blowing past their feet. They even had a friendly encounter with the giant squid. One sunny Sunday, as Hazel and her friends sat on the grassy bank of the lake eating sandwiches, a huge rippling tentacle emerged lazily from the water and waved. Startled for a split second, they quickly realized it was almost like a greeting. Giggling, they all waved back. When Alice tossed a bit of her sandwich crust into the water, the tentacle caught it deftly, then slid back under the surface. Hagrid had mentioned in passing that the squid was quite gentle and partial to scraps from students. Hazel felt thrilled and honored to have seen it again in broad daylight. It felt like meeting another kindly guardian of their magical new home. Halloween approached swiftly, and Hogwarts truly shone during the festive season. Halloween at Hogwarts was a spectacle of warmth and whimsy. In the days leading up to October 31st, the students carved jack-o'-lanterns in their free time. Professor Sprout supplied Hufflepuff House with some of Hagrid's enormous pumpkins to carve, which turned into a whole evening of laughter and mess in the common room. Hazel carved one with a simple smiling face and placed it in a corner of the common room. One of the twins gave it a little tap with her wand to make it wink cheerfully every few minutes. On Halloween night, the Great Hall was decorated with hundreds of floating pumpkins carved into lanterns of all shapes, some traditional grinning faces, others carved into bats and cats and moons. Real bats fluttered about near the enchanted ceiling, which was a velvety night sky full of drifting clouds. Hazel and her friends sat together at the Hufflepuff table, thoroughly enchanted. Throughout the feast, love bats swooped playfully among the students. One cheeky bat snuck a grape from Hazel's plate, which made her laugh. The ghosts seemed to be in especially good spirits. Nearly headless Nick, the Gryffindor ghost, entertained nearby tables by popping his nearly detached head off to show the curious first years. Hazel cringed but couldn't help peeking. It was gruesome yet strangely fascinating, and Nick was clearly pleased with the horrified reactions he got. Bowing theatrically, the fat friar floated above the Hufflepuff table leading an old wizarding folk song about pumpkin juice, and even some of the professors joined in the singing. Professor Flitwick in particular conducted with great gusto from atop a stack of pumpkins. Platters overflowed with seasonal treats: roast pumpkin, sweet corn, and pepper soup, and pumpkin pasty spiced to perfection. For dessert there were cauldron cakes, iced in orange and black, treacle tarts, shaped like smiling jack-o'-lanterns, and dishes of every flavor being in autumn colors. Hazel enjoyed every bite, her sweet tooth especially delighted by a caramel apple that a house elf presented her with a wink. After the feast, the Hogwarts ghosts put on a little impromptu show, a friendly dance of specters swirling through the hall to the tune of the school orchestra's bewitched instruments. The instruments played themselves in a lively, if slightly off-key, melody of the Hogwarts school song. Peeves the poltergeist zoomed overhead at one point, pelting students lightly with candy corn. Professor McGonagall gave him a stern look, but since he was spreading treats rather than tricks, she let it pass. That night, Hazel went to sleep with a belly full of sweets and a heart full of contentment. A gentle patter of rain began on the small windows as she drifted off, and she thought about how this castle truly knew how to celebrate joy and light in the darkest of seasons. As the weather grew colder and November arrived, the school was abuzz with excitement for the first Quidditch match of the season. For Hazel, It would be a brand new spectacle. On the day of the match, a crisp Saturday in early November, she joined Olivia and a group of Hufflepuff friends in the stands, all bundled in scarves and mittens against the chill. The Quidditch pitch stretched out before them, a vast oval field with 3 golden goal hoops at either end, shining under the pale autumn sun. The stands were alive with color and noise. Students from each house waved banners and wore scarves in their house colors, and the air hummed with the joyful din of chatter and anticipation. Hazel sipped from a mug of hot cocoa that a thoughtful older student had handed down their row. Feeling its warmth spread through her, she watched wide-eyed as the players in their yellow and black Hufflepuff robes and blue and bronze Ravenclaw robes walked out onto the field carrying their brooms. Hufflepuff was playing Ravenclaw today. Hazel found herself cheering for her house with pride but also simply thrilled by the energy of the event itself. When Madame Hooch's whistle blew and 14 players kicked off into the sky, Hazel's breath caught in her throat. The players streaked through the air on their brooms, their robes fluttering behind them. It was a blur of color as the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw chasers zoomed after the red quaffle. Below, the commentator's voice, a booming Gryffindor, 7th year named Lee, narrated the action with dramatic flair, making clever jokes that elicited laughter and applause from the crowd. Hazel had read about Quidditch, but seeing it in person was beyond exhilarating. She marveled as a Hufflepuff chaser scored the first goal through Ravenclaw's hoop, and the Hufflepuff supporters around her, herself included, leapt up with whoops of joy. She clapped and shouted along, her heart pounding not with fear but with excitement. High above, the 2 seekers circled patiently, eyes scanning for the glinting golden snitch that zigzagged through the air. Occasionally, one of the heavy bludgers would whiz near the stands, sending a few spectators ducking. Peeves, of course, found this hilarious and zoomed above, cackling each time a bludger was batted away by a beater. Despite the intense competition on the field, the atmosphere in the stands was friendly and fun. Hazel found herself seated beside a cheerful Ravenclaw 2nd year, who, after groaning in disappointment at a Hufflepuff goal, turned and good-naturedly explained a tricky Quidditch rule Hazel didn't understand. In turn, Hazel and the Hufflepuffs cheered politely when Ravenclaw evened the score with a well-executed play. They shared a jug of warm pumpkin juice that one of the professors passed along the rows, and Hazel felt a sense of camaraderie even between rival houses. After nearly an hour of play, the score was close and tensions high. Suddenly a flash of gold zipped near the Ravenclaw goalpost. Both seekers saw it at once. In a breathtaking finish, the Hufflepuff seeker, a 5th year named Cedric, went into a steep dive with the Ravenclaw seeker hot on his tail. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the 2 raced neck and neck toward the earth. Then, Cedric pulled out of the dive with his arm outstretched, and an explosion of cheers erupted from Hufflepuff. He had caught the snitch. The game was over, with Hufflepuff as the victor. Hazel jumped up and down, cheering at the top of her lungs and waving her yellow and black scarf. She didn't even mind that her voice cracked from shouting. The Hufflepuff team swooped around the pitch in a jubilant victory lap as their housemates sang, "Oh, Helga, we will follow," a rather off-key but enthusiastic house song. Even many Ravenclaws clapped sportingly for the winners before filing out to commiserate with their team. As the crowd began to disperse, Hazel felt a happy tiredness from all the excitement and cheering. She and Olivia made their way down the stands, still animatedly discussing the match with Clara and the twins. Hazel couldn't help imitating that dramatic final dive with her hand as a pretend broom, making her friends laugh as they walked back toward the castle. Even after they returned to the common room that evening, the adrenaline hadn't completely died down. A few of the older Hufflepuffs were still celebrating the Quidditch victory, and one of the 5th year prefects caught Hazel and her friends as they headed toward their dormitory stairs.
Psst. Firsties? Fancy a little late-night treat to celebrate, he whispered, a mischievous twinkle in his eye.
Hazel exchanged curious glances with Olivia and Clara. In minutes, they found themselves sneaking through quiet, torchlit corridors behind the prefect, suppressing giggles. He led them down a staircase not far from their common room, stopping before a large painting of a bowl of fruit set into the stone wall of a basement corridor. "Watch this," he murmured, reaching up to the painted pear among the fruits. He wiggled his fingers against it gently, tickling the pear. Hazel's eyes widened as the painted pear giggled. The portrait actually giggled, and then it transformed into a green doorknob before their eyes. The portrait swung open, revealing a doorway. A warm wave of delicious smells rolled out: freshly baked bread, simmering stew, sugar and spice. Hazel's mouth watered as the prefect ushered them inside the Hogwarts kitchens. The kitchen was enormous, almost an exact replica of the great hall above it, with high ceilings and 4 long tables directly below the house tables up in the hall. Dozens of house elves were bustling about cheerfully, stirring steaming pots, sliding trays into ovens, and carrying stacks of plates taller than themselves. Some were even dancing little jigs as they worked, humming tunes that sounded like lullabies. One stout elf near the door turned at the sound of the portrait opening, and the small group of students tiptoeing in. "Ah, young badgers," he squeaked in a friendly voice. Hazel realized he must recognize their Hufflepuff robes. "Come for a little post-match snack, is you?" Before Hazel could answer, the house elves sprang into action, clearly delighted by the arrival of students in their domain. In a flurry of movement, Hazel found herself gently guided to a low wooden stool at one of the long work tables. An eager elf pressed a generous slice of chocolate gâteau into her hands, while another offered Olivia a cup of warm milk sprinkled with cinnamon, and yet another presented Clara with a little bowl of strawberries and clotted cream.
Eat, eat, young ones, use all skin and bones after cheering so hard, insisted one matronly elf, wagging a long finger playfully.
Hazel took a bite of the cake and nearly melted at the taste. Decadent, rich chocolate with layers of cherry filling. "This is amazing," she whispered sincerely to the elves, causing a few of them to wiggle their bat-like ears in pleasure. Around them, several elves fussed affectionately, straightening the students' rumpled scarves, refilling their mugs of milk the instant they were half empty. It was like being doted on by a dozen kindly aunts and uncles. They thanked the elves profusely between bites, which only seemed to delight the little creatures more. Hazel noticed one particularly tiny elf bouncing on the balls of his feet with pride when she exclaimed how delicious the strawberries were. Another elf insisted on wrapping up some crumbly biscuits in a napkin for the girls to take for later midnight nibblings, pressing the packet into Hazel's hands despite her laughing protests that she was absolutely stuffed. After about 15 minutes, Hazel was quite full and very sleepy. The prefect glanced around at their drooping faces and clapped softly. "Thank you all. This was brilliant," he said warmly to the cluster of beaming house elves. "But I think it's off to bed for these champions now." The house elves bowed and curtsied. One even grabbed Hazel's hand and patted it gently, saying, "Good night, young miss. Sweet dreams to you," in a tone so caring it reminded Hazel of the Fat Friar's gentle greetings. With arms laden with a few wrapped treats they hadn't been allowed to refuse, Hazel and her friends followed the prefect out of the kitchen. He closed the door behind them, giving the pair a fond pat. It giggled sleepily as it became a painting once more. The corridor was silent and dim, the castle in slumber. The group tiptoed back to the common room, where only a few embers glowed in the fireplace. Most of their housemates were already in bed. The common room was empty, save for Tonks dozing in an armchair, her hair turning a soft pastel pink as she snored quietly. The prefect whispered a final congrats to the first years and headed off to his own dorm. Hazel and the girls crept into their dormitory, muffling their laughter. Hazel carefully placed the wrapped biscuits the elves gave her on her nightstand for tomorrow. Her stomach was far too full to consider another bite now. As she changed into her pajamas, Misty lifted her head quizzically from the bed, no doubt smelling the medley of kitchen scents, chocolates, cinnamon, and roast vegetables on Hazel's robes. "We had a feast without you," Hazel whispered apologetically to her kitten as she scooped her up. Misty sniffed Hazel's sleeve and then rubbed her face against Hazel's chin, tickling her with her whiskers, effectively forgiving her with that one affectionate gesture. Moments later, Hazel slipped under her quilt. Her body was finally catching up to how exhausted it truly was, pleasantly weighted by the night's excitement and the comfort of a late-night treat. She felt wonderfully spoiled and cared for. As she drifted off, Hazel reflected that if someone had told her a year ago she'd be eating cake served by magical house elves in a castle kitchen at midnight after watching a Quidditch match, she'd have thought it an impossible fantasy. But here at Hogwarts, such gentle wonders were her everyday reality. With that happy thought, and her stomach and heart equally full, Hazel fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The autumn months blended into one another in a tapestry of new experiences. Before she knew it, the chill of December settled over the castle. The ground was dusted with the first delicate snowflakes by the time the last leaves fell. Hogwarts in winter was like a scene from a holiday card. Icicles sparkled from the eaves. The lake froze in the shallows, providing a slippery playground for brave students, and the castle interiors were kept toasty with roaring fire. As December arrived, excitement built again, this time for Christmas. Many students planned to go home for the holidays, but Hazel decided to stay at Hogwarts. Her parents were traveling for work over Christmas, and the idea of spending the holiday at the castle with her new friends and magic all around was too wonderful to pass up. Olivia also chose to stay. Her family was visiting relatives abroad, and she too preferred the cozy castle to a long sea voyage. In the days leading up to Christmas, Hogwarts was transformed. The great hall was decked with 12 towering Christmas trees, each adorned with twinkling fairies or glittering baubles. Everlasting icicles hung from the banisters of the grand staircase, never melting but casting beautiful prismatic light. Suits of armor wore sprigs of holly and occasionally burst into cheerful carols, courtesy of Flitwick's holiday enchantment. The entire castle felt warm and festive, even as snow swirled outside. On Christmas Eve, a light snow fell, muffling the castle in a blanket of white hush. Only a handful of students from each house remained, so the great hall was set with a single long table for dinner, where all houses sat together. Hazel and Olivia dined with a group of amiable Ravenclaws and Gryffindors that evening, trading stories of holiday traditions from their families. Dumbledore strolled around the table after the meal, offering sweets from a tin and occasionally humming along to the carols playing from the Enchanted phonograph. Christmas morning came softly. Hazel woke to find a small pile of presents at the foot of her bed, more than she expected. Her parents had sent a cozy hand-knitted Hufflepuff scarf and a tin of homemade fudge, which made her miss them dearly, but she smiled knowing they thought of her. Olivia gifted Hazel a beautiful quill set with shimmery gold ink. "For your lovely letters home," Olivia said. To Hazel's surprise, even Professor Sprout had left packages for each of her first-year badgers, a small box of honeydew sweets, and a note with warm holiday wishes. Hazel spent a delightful Christmas day at Hogwarts. In the morning, she and Olivia built a tiny snowman on the windowsill of their common room, complete with a wee carrot nose filched from the kitchen. They joined a group of remaining students outside for a friendly snowball fight on the lawn. Hufflepuffs versus an impromptu alliance of Ravenclaws and the lone Slytherin, who stayed. Laughter echoed off the stone walls as enchanted snowballs zoomed about, courtesy of a few older students. Even the professors got in on the fun. Professor Flitwick was seen merrily directing enchanted snowballs to chase a cackling Tonks behind a tree. At the special Christmas feast, everyone sat at one table as a big, merry family. Crackers were pulled with resounding pops, emitting puffs of colored smoke and little gifts. Hazel won a set of violet mittens from one cracker, and Olivia got a tiny figurine of a dancing elf from another. Dumbledore led them in a round of carols, Hagrid's booming bass voice harmonizing surprisingly well with Professor McGonagall's clear soprano. Hazel felt a glow in her chest as she clinked goblets with friends from all houses, toasting to the best first term one could imagine. That night, Hazel wrote a long letter to her parents by the common room fire, telling them in detail about her magical Christmas. As much as she missed them in moments, especially opening their gifts, she realized she hadn't felt lonely. Hogwarts had a way of making sure no one was alone or unhappy on Christmas. She went to bed with a heart full of gratitude and wonder. With the dawn of the new year, the winter term commenced. January brought clear, cold days, when the air was so crisp it almost hurt to breathe, and nights so starry. Hazel often took a detour by a window on her way back from evening lessons, just to gaze for a moment. She settled even more into life at school. Classes resumed, challenging yet invigorating. Hazel had particularly grown to love herbology, no surprise for a Hufflepuff. Some joked, and charms, where Professor Flitwick's encouragement made even difficult spells feel attainable. Some evenings, when the wind howled outside and flurries of snow tapped at the round windows. Hazel and her friends would gather in the common room for casual knitting sessions. An older student taught them how to enchant knitting needles to work by themselves, which was endlessly amusing, or to play exploding snap tournaments on the rug. One late January night, they even convinced the fat friar to join their game of ghostly hide and seek in the darkened corridors. His warm chuckling gave them away every time. On weekends, when the weather allowed, students took advantage of the snow. One calm Saturday in February, a group of Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws decided to go ice skating on the frozen Black Lake near the shallower edges. Someone had procured skates for general use, likely from Madame Hooch or a conjuration by Professor Flitwick, who was known for his charity. Hazel wobbled at first on the unfamiliar blades, but soon found her balance. She glided carefully on the glassy surface hand in hand with Olivia, a gentle breeze at their backs. The sky was a pale winter blue, and the distant mountains stood white-capped and serene on the horizon, their reflection quivering in the ice below. They skated and laughed, the simple joy of it bringing roses to Hazel's cheeks. Misty watched from the shore in Olivia's care, wide green eyes following Hazel's every movement and tail flicking whenever Hazel slid a bit too fast. As the seasons turned to spring, the snows melted and the castle grounds burst into green once more. By April, the meadows around the lake were freckled with tiny wild crocuses, and the first brave daffodils nodding by Hagrid's garden. Hazel woke one morning to the sound of birds chirping madly outside the dorm window, and knew that spring had truly arrived. In late March, many students departed for a short Easter holiday. Hazel chose to remain at Hogwarts once again, finding the idea of a quiet springtime castle appealing, and truthfully not minding missing the non-magical world just yet. The school during Easter break was tranquil. Only a handful of students from each house stayed behind, so mealtimes were intimate gatherings at a single table in the Great Hall. Easter morning brought a pleasant surprise. Hazel awoke to find a parcel at the foot of her bed, a shiny foil-wrapped chocolate egg from her parents, along with a cheery card, decorated with dancing Easter bunnies that jumped across the page. Down in the common room, Professor Sprout had left a basket of pastel-colored sugared eggs for the students to share. Hazel and Olivia spent part of the morning giggling as they discovered that the house elves had hidden little candy eggs around the common room in boots behind cushions nestled in the folds of curtain. It became an impromptu egg hunt with a few other first years, and each time Hazel found one, a tiny squeaky cheer seemed to emit from the walls, the elves listening and delighted. That afternoon, those who stayed at school enjoyed a lovely Easter luncheon. The Great Hall was decorated with vases of fresh lilies and primroses from the greenhouses, and enchanted pastel ribbons that twirled around the floating candles. The meal was delicious, but simpler than the usual feast: tender roast lamb, mint sauce, new potatoes, and hot cross buns studded with currants. At the table, Hazel sat with a couple of Gryffindor first-year boys who had stayed together. They tried to see how many bites of a peppery hot cross bun one could take without needing a sip of milk. Hazel managed 3 before fanning her mouth, which set the group roaring with laughter. Dumbledore made the rounds as he had at Christmas, stopping behind Hazel's chair to gently tug her braid and say with a grandfatherly smile, "Miss Ashwood, I trust you are giving our kitchen elves a run for their money in that egg hunt." Hazel grinned and showed him one of the sugared eggs she'd found tucked in her pocket. Dumbledore chuckled and slid a sherbet lemon candy into her hand as a reward. The few days of Easter break were restorative. Hazel took quiet walks by the lake in the mild spring sunshine, wrote long letters home, sitting under a budding oak tree, and once spent an afternoon napping in the common room, armchair with Misty purring on her chest, sunlight streaming through the round windows, and not a worry in the world. When the rest of the students returned from break, Hazel was genuinely happy to see the castle bustling again. She and Olivia greeted their friends with enthusiastic hugs in the entrance hall. There was a lot of exchanging of stories. Her classmates told of home family gatherings, Muggle siblings marveling at tales of Hogwarts, and Hazel proudly recounted how peaceful and pretty Hogwarts had been over Easter and described the sweet surprise of the egg hunt. With Easter behind them and the final term ahead, lessons ramped up in intensity. Professors began preparing first years for their year-end exams, assigning slightly more homework and reviewing past topics. Hazel found that studying at Hogwarts was actually pleasant, especially when done in a cozy nook of the common room with a plate of biscuits to share. or in the library's sunny window seat with Olivia quizzing her on spells. On some evenings, an older Hufflepuff would kindly host a little study group by the common room fire, where first years of all houses, a few Gryffindors often popped by too, since everyone knew Hufflepuffs were welcoming revised together. These often turned into gentle chats about how far they'd all come since September. One drizzly May afternoon, Hazel realized with a start just how natural everything had become to her. Wearing robes, casting spells to dry her socks, chatting with nearly headless Nick about the upcoming exams. He had offered her some head-losing study tips, which she politely and humorously declined. Hogwarts was truly home now. As the weather warmed and May gave way to June, exam period arrived. The first years, having heard the older students stress about OWLs and NEOETs, were determined to do well on their much more basic end-of-year tests. Still, a few of Hazel's classmates grew nervous at the idea of their first real magical exams. Hazel herself felt a flutter or two in her stomach, thinking about the practical exam. What if her matchstick wouldn't turn into a needle in front of the examiner? Or she messed up her levitation charm under pressure? But the Hufflepuff ethos of teamwork shone brightly. Her housemates rallied around one another. They organized calm review sessions, shared study notes, and the prefects reassured them all that first-year exams were important, but nothing to lose sleep over. Exams themselves went smoother than Hazel expected. The written tests, multiple-choice questions about magical theory, and short essays felt manageable thanks to her steady revision. In charms, Hazel confidently levitated a wooden pineapple across Professor Flitwick's desk. He applauded softly as it landed without a wobble. In transfiguration, she transfigured her matchstick into not just a needle but a perfect shiny silver hairpin. McGonagall gave a rare approving nod. Her potion, brewed under Snape's watchful gaze, was the exact color of lilac syrup it was meant to be. He said nothing, but took her labeled vial with an almost polite dip of his head, and in herbology she successfully repotted a bouncing bulbicin plant without it hopping out of the pot once. Professor Sprout clapped her earth-covered hands and declared Hazel had a natural touch. One particularly beautiful night in mid-June, Hazel and some friends attended their astronomy practical exam on the tower. Tasked with identifying constellations and planets, Hazel found herself less nervous and more quietly exhilarated. Under that familiar blanket of stars, she plotted the position of Mars and Saturn with steady hands. When she finished, she took a moment to gaze out at the Hogwarts grounds far below, bathed in silver moonlight, and she felt a surge of accomplishment. She had come so far since that first train ride in September. When exams ended, a weight lifted off everyone's shoulders. The last week of school was a blur of joy and relaxation. Without tests to worry about, the students spent their time outdoors in the splendid June weather. Hazel joined a few Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs in a pickup game of gobstones toss by the lake one afternoon. They didn't care about the rules, just seeing how far they could flick the messy gobstones. Everyone ended up splattered with foul-smelling goo and laughing uncontrollably. The teachers seemed more relaxed too. Professor McGonagall was spotted at the staff table actually smiling at a joke Professor Dumbledore told during dinner, and Professor Snape deducted not a single point that Hazel heard of in those final days. Perhaps because even he was in a lighter mood seeing the year's end in sight. On the eve of the departure, Hazel took a slow walk around the castle by herself in the late afternoon. Misty trotted alongside her down the corridors as she visited her favorite little spots. The windowsill on the first floor where she and Olivia had watched a thunderstorm in April. A portrait of a snoozing little friar, who always snored a funny tune. Hazel giggled as it still wheezed out a jazzy rhythm. The niche behind the library where she'd once found Olivia in tears over a homesick letter and comforted her. They'd become even closer after that. Hazel gently ran her hand along the cool stone wall and whispered, "See you soon," to the castle itself, feeling a pang at leaving it for the summer, even though she also looked forward to home. The end-of-year feast arrived, magnificent as ever. The great hall was decorated in Hufflepuff colors of yellow and black. For to Hazel's astonishment and delight, Hufflepuff had won the House Cup. Dumbledore announced it with a twinkle in his eye. In first place, with 380 points, Hufflepuff. Hazel nearly jumped out of her seat cheering, and the entire Hufflepuff table erupted in roars of happiness. Even some Gryffindors and Ravenclaws applauded warmly. Hufflepuff had not won in some years, and it felt extra special. The older Hufflepuffs ruffled the first year's hair and said, "Well done. Those class points you earned helped." Hazel was rosy with pride. As dessert plates vanished and final goodbyes were said, Hazel realized she wasn't truly sad. Unlike at the start of the year, she knew this wasn't farewell. Just until next time, the castle would be here, waiting for them. When summer ended, the next morning, trunks were packed. Goodbyes to professors were given. Hazel made sure to personally thank Professor Sprout for everything, and got a tight, warm hug in return along with, "See you in September, dear girl." And the students boarded the Hogwarts Express for the journey home. Hazel managed to snag a compartment with Olivia, Clara, Ben, and the twins, and they spent the first part of the ride excitedly talking over each other, reminiscing about funny moments, making grand plans to meet up during summer, those who lived close enough anyway, and speculating about what second year would be like. I hear we get to see the real Sorting Hat song before sorting next year. I can't wait for Care of Magical Creatures in third year. Think we'll get to see a unicorn before then. Eventually, their energy gently ebbed, replaced by a comfortable languor. The friends fell into companionable silence as the countryside rolled by in a lush green blur. Outside the window, Hazel spent a long while simply gazing out at the passing fields and hedgerow. How different this journey felt from the one in September. Then, she had been full of nerves and not knowing what awaited. Now she felt calm, happy, and brimming with memories she wouldn't trade for anything. In the reflection of the glass, Hazel saw herself smiling softly. She looked more grown somehow, content, confident, and with a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Misty snoozed in her basket on the seat next to Hazel, occasionally emitting a little snore. Across from Hazel, Olivia had dozed off with her head on Clara's shoulder. Clara herself was fighting sleep, her chin bobbing. Ben and the twins were quietly playing a last game of exploding snap in the corner, the snaps coming at longer, lazier intervals as even they started succumbing to drowsiness. Hazel leaned her head against the cool window and watched the clouds change shapes. The gentle rocking of the train, the rhythmic clackety-clack of wheels on rails, and the soft warmth of the afternoon sun on her face made her eyelids heavy. Misty's basket emitted a little purr. Hazel let her eyes drift shut, her mind wandering over the wonderful year she'd had. Flashes of moments, like a flickering slideshow. The first sight of the Great Hall's ceiling, catching the feather in charms, laughter in the Hufflepuff common room, the starry astronomy night, Hagrid's cheerful wave, the kind faces of her professors, and so many more. She felt someone, probably one of the twins, drape a light blanket over her lap, and Hazel smiled without opening her eyes, surrounded by the quiet presence of her friends, the soothing sounds of the train, and the knowledge that home awaited beyond King's Cross. Hazel let herself drift into a light doze. When the announcement came that the train would arrive in 10 minutes, the compartment came alive again with soft stirring and reluctant stretches. Hazel awoke to the golden light of late afternoon slanting in, and the sight of familiar cityscape approaching. They all began gathering their thing. Hazel carefully placed Misty back in her basket and latched it. The kitten peered out curiously at the now urban scenery beyond the window. As the Hogwarts Express slowed to a halt at platform 9 3/4, Hazel felt a mix of emotions. She was excited to see her parents. She missed them dearly, but also found herself already anticipating returning to Hogwarts in the fall. The magical castle had woven itself into her heart. Stepping off the train, Hazel was immediately engulfed in a warm hug. Her mother and father had been waiting right by where her carriage stopped. "Welcome home, Hazel, darling." Her mother cried, happy tears in her eyes as she squeezed her. Her father took her trunk handle from her with one hand and ruffled her hair with the other. "Look at you," he said, pride evident in his voice, a Hogwarts student through and through. They helped her navigate through the magical barrier back into the muggle world of King's Cross. The station bustled with late-day travelers and echoes of train whistles. Hazel's mother fussed affectionately over Misty. "I hope you've been taking good care of our girl," she cooed at the kitten, who mewed as if in response that yes, of course she had. Hazel turned to wave farewell to Olivia and her other friends. Olivia's parents had kindly offered to give Clara a ride home in their enchanted car. "Write to me," Hazel called. Every week, Olivia promised, blowing a dramatic kiss and pretending to sob into a handkerchief comically. They all shared a final laugh and wave before splitting off to their respective families. Crossing the barrier with her parents, leaving the magical platform behind, felt different from last time. Last time, Hazel had felt uncertainty. Now, she carried with her a quiet confidence and the sure knowledge that the magical world was a permanent part of her life. That evening, Hazel sat by her bedroom window at home. Misty curled up on her windowsill and watched the sun set over her familiar neighborhood. How small the houses looked after Hogwarts' grandeur, and yet, she felt comfortable here too, in her childhood room, with its shelves of books and the posters of cute kittens her mother insisted she keep up. She realized the feeling in her chest was not sadness, but gentle happiness. Happiness to be home, and happiness knowing she would return to her other home soon enough. Downstairs, she could hear the clink of dishes as her mother prepared dinner, and the low hum of her father's voice as he told an eager neighbor about Hazel's accomplishments. The normalcy of it was soothing. As Hazel stroked Misty's soft fur, watching the first stars blink into view, she began to tell the kitten all about what summer at home might hold. Visiting her grandparents by the sea, she'd show Misty the sandy beach, practicing Quidditch with improvised goals in the backyard. Her father was already crafting a toy snitch for her, perhaps writing some short stories with her new quill set. Misty purred sleepily, as if content just to be by Hazel's side. When Hazel climbed into bed that night, wrapping herself in her cool cotton sheets, she realized it felt a little like the end of a beautiful dream, except it wasn't ending, only pausing. Lying there, she closed her eyes and mentally retraced her steps through the Hogwarts year, each memory clear and glowing. She knew in a few months' time, she'd step back through the brick wall onto the magical platform, board the Scarlet Train again, and return to the Enchanted Castle where countless adventures awaited. With that comforting thought nestled in her heart, Hazel drifted off to sleep in her old room. Outside the open window, a nightingale sang a gentle song from the garden hedge. Hazel's last drowsy thought was a hopeful, happy one, that the song sounded just a bit like Hogwarts. The melody nearly headless Nick had been singing at the Halloween feast. She smiled in her sleep. And so, Hazel Ashwood's first year at Hogwarts came to a close. Not with an end, but with a peaceful interlude. Surrounded by love, both at home and at school, she slept soundly, dreaming of soft candlelight and friendly laughter echoing in stone halls. Her world was richer and more magical than ever, and she knew that come next September, when she boarded the Hogwarts Express once more, it would be like turning the page to the next chapter of a cozy, wondrous story that had only just begun.